Is it officially time for the BYU football program to be concerned about their inability to add big-time talent via the transfer portal? Some of you are saying yes, others may be saying no. I've got two very contrasting ideas about BYU's status with the transfer portal, and we're talking about them on today's podcast.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at the College Football Playoff. It begins this Friday. Obviously, plenty of coverage to come on Saturday with 3 games. Check it all out on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. All right, let's talk some BYU football in the transfer portal. Now, I mentioned in the open of today's show, there's two very contrasting ideas I've got kind of percolating around my noggin when it comes to the transfer portal. And one of them is, and it comes essentially via an email I got from Nate, who said this: Jake, I look at what Utah is doing in the transfer portal right now, and it makes me wonder, why is BYU seemingly getting it all wrong in the transfer portal? Utah, as of my writing of this email, has added 10 players via the transfer portal, whereas BYU has just the one, that's Carson Ryan, coming in by way of the University of Utah. Should I be concerned that BYU is unable to add big-time talent via the transfer portal? Great question, Nate. I think on its head right now, yes, you could be concerned about BYU's seeming inability to add talent via the transfer portal. But let me add this little nugget to that conversation. The University of Utah finished the season 5-7. Not a good year by their standards. They were expected to win the Big 12 championship, and they're not even bowling right now. BYU, by comparison's sake, was expected to finish 13th in this league. The over-under on their win total was 4.5 wins. They essentially were supposed to be in the position that Utah is in, whereas Utah, in many respects, is supposed to be where BYU is at, or even a little bit better. BYU went 10-2. Utah, Kyle Whittingham said it himself towards the end of the season. I remember if it was the second to last week or the last week during his media availability. He said that Utah was going to add upwards of 40 newcomers, and he expected maybe 40 to 50% of those to be transfer portal additions to the Utah football program. He put the writing right out there and said that we are going to be adding multiple bodies when it comes to the transfer portal, and that's exactly what the Utes have done so far. I think as I'm recording this podcast, they may have 10, maybe 11 transfer portal additions. And if they're going to essentially say 40 to 50% of potentially 40 newcomers, they've still got 9 or 10 guys to go when it comes to their transfer portal additions. That's what happens when you finish the season the way Utah finished their season. They saw that they had major holes in their lineup, and they're trying to plug those holes. Have they plugged them? It's anybody's guess, because the transfer portal, once again, continues to be a little bit of a crapshoot. There are absolutely guys in the transfer portal you're like, that's a home run addition. But there's other guys out there that you're wondering, why are they in the transfer portal? Were they forced out of their previous university? Were they run out being malcontents and told, hey, you need to look elsewhere? Are they simply just trying to cash in for NIL? Are they trying legitimately to find a better situation for themselves? Or are they trying to simply find a starting spot? Any one of those and a million other reasons are why these players enter the transfer portal. I saw it last night watching some of the bowl games. I think it's 2,300 plus players have gone into the portal so far. And by the way, the portal window does not close until next Saturday when BYU plays in their bowl game. That's December 28th. The thing is, BYU right now, and I'm not going to be able to really kind of explain more of this because I can't really show you the math, but kind of trying to make heads and tails of the fact that BYU has to cut down their roster to 105 players next year, and then trying to do the math of, okay, how many players are exiting? How many guys are coming home off of missions that we expect? How many guys are coming in via high school? And all the math screams to me that BYU, if they're able to add 10 guys via the transfer portal, that's the high watermark. That's how many guys I think the absolute max from my side of things, looking at the roster and what I'm projecting. And I will admit, I am not the official roster construction guy for BYU, but I see it as BYU can only take what Utah has added so far, and their roster would be absolutely stocked up, and they couldn't add anybody else. There's no wiggle room beyond that. So the getting back to the crux of the matter, speaking of Nate's question here, is I look at it from the perspective that Utah, they realize they have major lineup issues, and they're trying to plug those holes. BYU, conversely, went 10-2 and showed that their roster is fairly well constructed. Now, could that fall apart in an offseason? Sure. But BYU, by and large, has not been hit by the transfer portal very heavily. I think at last count, just 8 guys have left BYU via the transfer portal. And I'll admit, I think the vast majority of those players were told, hey, here's the situation. We're cutting down the roster. We think it's probably in your best interest to look elsewhere. I think they're being forced out, to use the more crass term, as it were. They're being told, hey, there's this thing called the transfer portal. You should go check it out. And it's unfortunate. That's the way it goes down in many circumstances. But here's the deal. BYU's got a pretty darn good roster that just went 10-2. Why mess with why mess with a good thing? Why fix what ain't broke, to use that expression, for the BYU football program? So hopefully that answers your question on Nate's side of things. Now, I said there were 2 contrasting thoughts that I had, and the thought came, and it's another good friend of this podcast. I'm not going to name him. He knows who he is. He's become actually a dear friend simply due to our connection via the podcast and a number of other things. But he had a very, very good point that thinking about it, at first I kind of bristled at it and said, okay, I disagree with that. But the more I think about it, I think this is kind of the right take. So he says this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. He says, and he was talking also about Utah cleaning up in the transfer portal. He says, whiff after whiff for BYU. The NIL game is going to have to go dramatically increase for BYU to get competitive and get dudes in NIL. He talks about how that BYU, he feels like, needs to be a place for transfer portal guys to land, and BYU needs to up the thing. But also, they talk about when BYU in continuity and tried to essentially hold over. And remember, I talked about this earlier this week on the podcast. 2 years ago, BYU added something like 60 new bodies via the transfer portal and other methods, and completely turned over their roster. And it yielded a 5-7 season. This past season, they kind of sat back and said, you know what? We're going to bet on continuity and let guys develop. And it obviously yielded a 10-2 campaign. He makes a good point here. Many of the primary contributors on BYU were transfer portal guys. Darius Lassiter, Keelan Marion, Caleb Etienne, Austin Leusa, Isaiah Jota, Waylon Lopwaho, Logan Latui, Jack Kelly, Harrison Taggart, Crew Wakely. It just goes on and on and on down the list. Just to name a few, he added 13 names there. But no, the point remains, BYU have been screwed without those dudes this year. He's got a very good point there, because BYU has used guys via the transfer portal, and obviously, given time, they have become the players that BYU has had a lot of success with. So, like I said, I bristled at the initial kind of, I may have perceived it as criticism initially, but the more I think about it, there's wisdom there. I'm not saying that BYU needs to absolutely go all in on being a developmental program, bringing in high school talent and betting on that being what BYU's success is going to be predicated upon, because you need to use the transfer portal. You have to add talent. But the other side of it is that you have to have transfer portal talent that maybe sticks around more than just 1 year, and you have to do it strategically. I've talked about previously on this podcast with BYU. They're very careful when it comes to their investments. I call them strategic investments. And what I mean by that is when they have invested in different things with BYU football, it's been very targeted things. I think that's probably the best way for BYU to use the transfer portal, is essentially to have a targeted idea of what you're trying to accomplish with the portal, bring in that talent, and hopefully it fits right away. But if not, maybe has some extra eligibility. Speaking of the player, but the player has extra eligibility, and that way they can kind of grow with the program a little bit. And as this good friend of the podcast refers to, they can become part of that backbone that has led to BYU's success. So you see where I'm going with this. Hopefully, there's 2 very contrasting ideas where I'm saying on one side of things, BYU went 10-2. There's not a lot to be fixed, speaking of BYU football, as compared to what the University of Utah is having to deal with right now. But also at the same time, I understand that BYU's added 1, as of recording this podcast, count them 1 transfer portal edition. I don't think you can go that light either. I think that BYU will eventually add multiple guys, and Guys like Ben Criddle out there saying that BYU's got potentially 5 commitments coming in the next couple of few days over this weekend. Great. I hope they do it. And I hope I have plenty of content to talk about on future editions of this podcast. But at the same time, I'm not going to get too up or down on any given transfer portal day, even as rough as it's been, because it's been a bit of a dud, frankly, for BYU football so far. But so once again, hopefully see the contrasting styles there. I still believe BYU absolutely needs to utilize the transfer portal. If you can find high-end talent, and as our good friend here has pointed out, a lot of talent that has helped BYU get to where they are today at 10-2 was transfer portal talent. But I also don't think you can go wholesale in on being a truly all transfer portal type team. It just doesn't work for BYU, I don't think, in large doses to add that many guys, because as many of you, if not all of you, understand, BYU is a unique place. It's a unique university. It's a faith-based institution. You have to kind of have the right guys. And that sounds a little bit weird, but you guys know what I'm talking about. You have to have BYU guys to succeed at BYU. And those are harder to find. You have to be, like I said, more targeted and more thorough in your approach to finding those guys. But once you find them, hey, they can have a lot of success and they can help BYU along the way as well. Now, there's another thing that percolated yesterday, came up. It was something I've been waiting on to hear what the ruling was of this. A quarterback in the SEC may have absolutely laid the hammer to one of the last bastions of NCAA power. And we're going to talk about how it could impact college football, but more importantly, right here at home at BYU. And we'll get to that next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to help you have fun this NFL season. And more importantly, they want you guys to have success and catch up on all the action with the NFL. The best part is you can cash in for $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins, courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. It's as simple as that, my friends. It doesn't get much simpler than that, but more importantly, you can use the app. It's really simple and easy to use, as FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, and they want to make it as simple as possible. When you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you want to place those bets, you can go online, go out, check out our friends at FanDuel, see the live play-by-play, view live statistics, all on the same page where you're placing your bets. And more importantly, you can still get started with $150 in bonus bets, courtesy of our friends at FanDuel, with your first $5 bet hits. It's really as simple as that. Take advantage of the opportunity today to cash in with our friends over at FanDuel. Once again, $150 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet. And if it hits, you win it. Simple as that. It's all courtesy, once again, of your friends over at FanDuel. They are an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Now, Prize Picks is here for you guys to help you have fun when it comes to winning real money. That's the best part about Prize Picks, is they have got opportunities for you guys to cash in, win up to 1,000 times your bets. And more importantly, right now they're giving $50 bonus with your first $5 lineup. That's an incredible offer from our friends at Prize Picks. But more importantly, they want you guys to be able to but have fun and win while you're watching the sports you already be watching. That's the thing about this. It's not having to add anything to what you're already doing to have fun when it comes to our friends over at Prize Picks, but they also at the same time want you guys to have an opportunity to win. The best part is you can check it out over at Prize Picks by downloading the app today. More importantly, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege and get that $50 instantly as you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app today. That's Prize Picks. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get that $50 instantly after you place your first $5 lineup. Cash in today and do it with our friends over at Prize Picks. Of course, Prize Picks is here for you guys to run your game. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Hope you're having a fantastic day whenever you hear this. All right. Big news out of the SEC in college football yesterday that Diego Pavia, former New Mexico State star, now starring at Vanderbilt, won a preliminary injunction against the NCAA to allow him to play in 2025. Now, those of you keeping track at home, this is a young man who played at the New Mexico Military Institution, I believe, which is a junior college for 2 years, then went on to start at New Mexico State for 2 years, and then used his final year of eligibility at the collegiate level, at least we thought was his final year of eligibility this past year, in Nashville, playing for the Vanderbilt Commodores. Well, he challenged that, claiming under the statutes right now with NIL that his time at the junior college level essentially precluded him from ever being able to cash in on his NIL rights. And this judge handed down, once again, a preliminary injunction yesterday, allowing Diego Pavia, as it stands, to play in 2025. What does this mean for college football? Well, the preliminary injunction is not the final ruling. So let's be very clear about this. This could be reversed very quickly. And also, I expect the NCAA is going to file a countersuit or an appeal very, very quickly to try and get this reversed. As it stands, though, Diego Pavia has an opportunity to cash in for NIL and play another year of eligibility, if not more than that. If this holds up in court, once again, if it holds up in court and this becomes the final ruling, there will be precedents now for junior college guys, looking at Jake Retzlaff, to have their NCAA eligibility extended to a full 4 or 5 years. We're looking potentially at Jake Retzlaff. Many of us were expecting next year to be his final year in a BYU uniform because conventional wisdom said he spent 2 years at the junior college level. He redshirted last year. He was a redshirt junior this year. He's a redshirt senior in 2025, and then he's off to whatever is next for him. If, once again, this preliminary injunction becomes a final ruling, the NCAA is unable to appeal it successfully to reverse the decision, that would mean that Jake Retzlaff could be BYU starting quarterback till 2027? Question mark? That's the crazy thing about all this, is that injunction could set precedents to essentially lay the hammer and just smash another one of the foundations of one of the last few bastions the NCAA has really been clinging to. Any of you who are longtime listeners know that I have my umbrage with the NCAA. I think it's an archaic institution that needs to get with the times or just go away. That's my best thought, is that the NCAA just goes away and they start again from scratch. But as it stands right now, the NCAA, one of the few things they've been able to essentially kind of hold over guys, speaking of players, is the eligibility rules. But if this injunction, once again, from Diego Pavia gets struck down and it holds up in court, it'll be appealed to high heaven, probably all the way to the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court. But if it holds up, we have just changed eligibility, and is eligibility just a myth at that point? Could you play college football for however long a university wants to have you there playing for? Could it once again become much like the NFL? Think about this. College football, the one thing you could always kind of count on is you're going to have guys come through your program, play for 4 or 5, and in the case of the COVID era, 6 or 7 years, but then they were off to the NFL, where a career can extend. The average career is right around 3.5 years, but you can have 20-year careers for certain guys, and you can play forever for a franchise and become an icon, guy who has a statue, that type of stuff in the NFL. The college experience for many, many eons, I guess decades at this point, has been that it's been a kind of a snapshot of a guy's overall football playing career. If this becomes a thing and the NCAA is unable to enforce any type of eligibility, what does that mean for college football? Are we going to have 30-year-old guys still playing college football when they could be in the NFL? With NIL, the money could end up making sense in that circumstance. It is going to be a really, really interesting time to see where this all goes with regards to Diego Pavia's injunction. As it stands, once again, the injunction stipulates he alone right now, as far as I read and understood, can cash in 2025 for NIL. There will be a full ruling, a kind of a final ruling coming from that judge. Once again, I'm sure that an appeal is already being drafted by the NCAA, arguing as to why they want to change it. But the other thing about this is you read the kind of the ruling, some of the snippets from the judge who made this ruling. He essentially calls the NCAA out on their farce of quote unquote degree progress with these university athletes. Like he's essentially saying that these guys are playing football. They're essentially star football players. That's what their career is. And the university element is just a little side thing to them. That's kind of the gist I took away from it. He's talking about the fact that they're trying to claim that they're making sure these athletes are progressing along, getting to degrees, but they're allowing guys. I think the quarterback out there is it TJ Finley, who's going to play for his 5th college football program in his collegiate career this upcoming season, provided he lands somewhere. That's not that. Does TJ Finley have multiple degrees? I highly doubt it. How have his grades been able to transfer over to every university? Have some of them been accepted? Have other ones been thrown out? It's a convoluted mess right now when it comes to college football. But once again, if this holds up, if this is absolutely ruled to be a legitimate thing in the NCAA's eyes and they have to deal with it, you're looking at Jake Retzlaff going from what appeared to be a senior season next year to him just coming off what we would consider now a redshirt freshman season with 3 years to play. Crazy. I mean, absolutely, you know what, crazy type scenes to consider that notion. If it pans out that way, I do wonder how long Jake Retzlaff would ultimately play at BYU. Maybe he would just play next year in 2025 and then say, hey, I'm going to try my hand at the NFL. But once again, if it holds up, he could also say, hey, BYU, the BYU Jew is here to stay. Man, consider that notion. It's absolutely baffling to me. And I was stunned that the judge ruled this way already, but at the same time, it also kind of makes sense. I think this judge realizes the NCAA for what it is, a farce of an organization that's trying to, quote, operate in the best interest of these student athletes, but at the same time, it is allowing the inmates to run the asylum in many respects. It's a crazy time out there. I know I used crazy about 50 million times on today's podcast, but there's no other real word to describe accurately what's going on in this sports arena. But man, where's the next cut down for the NCAA going to come from? Because the courts have absolutely neutered that organization. And now with eligibility being in question, I do wonder what the future looks like, truthfully. It's going to be an absolutely crazy time. I'm sure that eventually it'll come down to maybe the conferences stipulating how long you have to play in college, that type of stuff. But man, what a wild consideration that maybe, just maybe, Jake Retzlaff in 2025 is not his swan song. Maybe, just maybe, that's the halfway point of his career with the BYU Cougars. All right, we'll finish up today's show with some of your questions. I threw it out to our Locked On Cougars Insider group saying, hey, want to answer your guys' questions. What do you guys got for me? You guys responded in force, and we'll get to those coming up next right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at the College Football Playoff. It is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, the College Football Playoff is guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. The best part is TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins this Saturday, December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9 o'clock Mountain for those of you here in Utah. Leading into their first matchup, the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon Eastern. That's 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Then they'll follow that up with Clemson Tigers looking to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2 o'clock Mountain. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Would highly encourage you guys, if you've not done so already, sign up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on everything I'm hearing about BYU sports. I am doing my best to fill in our group as it stands right now with the latest of what I'm hearing. A lot of the stuff, if you want up-to-the-minute updates of what I'm doing with the podcast and that type of stuff, join us today. It's a $5 a month charge, but the good news is you get 2 weeks, full 14 days before you're charged anything to see if it's the right option for you in terms of a free trial. So click the link in the show notes, whether you're watching this or listening to it, and join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, questions from the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Well, Jensen, I already answered your question. Thoughts on the NCAA's ruling on Diego Pavia and how this could affect someone like Jake? I think I just spent the whole B block of today's show talking about that one, Jensen. So hopefully you got your answer there. Matt Lee, good question here. What are the chances of getting Ryder Lyons? 1 in 100, 1 in 10, 1 in 4, and when would he announce his commitment? If it's not Lyons, if it's not Lyons coming to BYU, is Enoch Watson the guy? When is he home from a mission? That's a great question. So Ryder Lyons, BYU's right there in the mix for him. He has been out to visit BYU multiple times. I think that BYU stands a fighting chance. I would still say, though, they are not the favorite. His brother Walker, as many of you might recall, is playing at USC. USC has pull. And I think that as it stands right now, I'd still say that Ryder Lyons, USC is probably the favorite to land him, but BYU will go down swinging with a kid like Ryder Lyons until he tells them no. Picks BYU, that's a 5-star talent, one of the best quarterbacks that BYU's ever signed, quite legitimately, and be a really, really nice pickup. When is he going to announce his commitment? I was expecting it almost any day at one point, but at the same time, he will make the decision when he feels good and ready. But once again, if it is not Lyons, is Enoch Watson the guy? I can tell you that BYU staff has been very high on Enoch Watson's ability, but he's still another year from getting home. So that's the question: is how quickly could Enoch Watson get himself back in shape and step into the role? That's a big question mark. And the final question from Matt here: what music does Jake Hatch listen to? Well, right now it's Christmas music. I think I'm a November 1. Christmas music comes on. I don't listen to it exclusively through those 2 months leading up to Christmas, but when we're less than a week away from Christmas, trust me, it's all Christmas music right now. And all varieties. I grew up with a mom that ingrained in me that Christmas music was great in every form and fashion, so I listened to it all. Beyond that, I'm a fairly open-minded music person. I love alternative. I love rock. I love hip-hop. I love country. I like different things in all genres. I just have, I guess, an ear. If I like something, I like it. I don't necessarily subscribe to being, oh, I don't listen to that. If I like it, I'll listen to it. So that I'm pretty open-minded when it comes to that, Matt. I'm not, like I said, a very closed-minded person when it comes to my music preferences. Byron said this: football. I believe Ben Cross we should see an announcement of five defensive players. Any idea who he is talking about? I'll have to ask around about that. I'll see if I can find out. Also, he says this: basketball. We've heard that Kevin Young is not done recruiting. Any hints on who they might get? He's talking about other guys out there that are still available in this recruiting cycle. Here's the deal: BYU is, I think, turning over every stone. And he mentions the numbers 4, 8, and 9. Avent, Wilson, and Burrios on 24/7 are still uncommitted. Any chance with them? I would say until they commit elsewhere, there's always a chance for BYU to get in the mix with these guys, considering what we have seen from them flashing cash in NIL to get a guy like AJ DeBonsa. And I'm sure that AJ, in his own right, is trying to get top-end talent to join him in Provo. I think we are overlooking what Xavier Staten could do for the BYU basketball program. That is a legit 7-foot rim-protecting big man that BYU will use to great effect. But I think the BYU is trying every avenue to add top-end talent. I think I can assuredly say that. Bryce asked this: hope I'm not too late to submit my question, but why does it feel that there's a lack of NIL investment in BYU's football team? I'm grateful there's a heavy investment in basketball. It'd just be nice if we had one of our NIL guys doing more work for the football team. It's a good question. I think on its face, it looks like BYU is not investing heavily NIL-wise in football, but at the same time, here's the deal with football. You have to spread that around to a lot more guys than basketball. Basketball has got, 15 guys on scholarship right now, whereas college football, 85 men on scholarship, and eventually 105 guys. Now, are all of them going to get the same level of NIL? Absolutely not. The other factor coming into effect is revenue sharing. And that will be, I think, the 75-80% of the 20 million that's going to be doled out is probably going to go to football. It's going to go where the money comes in from. And that's where the football program, it makes the absolute lion's share, if not more than that, of the revenue for BYU athletics. And therefore, they are going to gobble up 70, 75, 80% of that cap, or if for lack of a better term, when it comes to revenue sharing. The other, so let's say it's 75% of 20 million, that's 15 million goes to football program. Then 5 million beyond that is doled out to the rest of the athletic department. Of that 5 million, I think college basketball, speaking of BYU men's basketball, what do they get? 75 to 80% of that? It gets really kind of thin really quickly, but there are so many different avenues for guys to get paid. I think NIL and football, they may not be flashing as much cash as basketball, obviously, with DeBonsa and the reported 4.55, $7 million, depending on what report you want to believe. I've said on this podcast, I have heard multiple times somewhere between 4.5 and 5 million. But the thing is, I think football, it gets spread out much more heavily. But it'd be nice, once again, I agree with you, Bryce, to see a guy or guys, speaking of BYU's nameless, faceless donors who've got all these deep pockets, maybe invest a little heavier in the BYU football program and bring in some high-level talent. Tyson, Idaho has the famous Potato Bowl, but Utah doesn't have a bowl game. If the state of Utah got a bowl game, where would you have it played and what would it be named? Well, I'm a homer. I'm going to play it at Lavelle Edwards Stadium because it's the biggest stadium in the state and it has natural grass. I'm all for that. What would I call it? Salt City Bowl? No. Sig Lily Bowl? No. Beehive Bowl? Maybe. I don't know. I'll have to workshop that a little bit. The State of Sport Bowl? Nah. So, Tyson, let me think about that one. That's a great question. I just may call it the Utah Bowl. The BYU. I don't know. There's multiple ideas out there. Let me think about it. It's an interesting idea. Jeff Henor, how do you think BYU football will do next year? Well, I think the expectation level is going to be pretty high considering BYU went 10-2, Jeff. And if they hold on to this talent and fingers crossed once again that they add some talent via the transfer portal and upgrade it a little bit. Why couldn't they make another run at 10-2 next year? I think that's what it's going to stand for BYU. Now, I will have to look at how they do in the bowl game and kind of get a feel for what I expect for BYU coming out of that, my vibe check at that point. But anything below 8 wins right now next year, but I think frankly be a disappointment. It's kind of downgrading when I just said maybe 10 wins, but you make a run at the 10 wins. We'll see what happens. Reich, you have a question about a position group stacking up for next year with return missionaries. What positions are incoming? I'll have to do some research on that. I don't think we'll have a full picture on that, quite frankly, until National Signing Day in early February when BYU puts out their official release and announces when guys are coming home, because there are guys who are going to be enrolled in January, guys who enroll in June, some guys will enroll in August when the season finally begins. There's a lot of different moving parts on that, so I can't answer that question fully right now. Let's see, man, I am running out of time. I'll get to one more of these. So apologies, I couldn't get to all the questions today. I got a few more of them. But let's see. Do you see a world, this comes from Jared, do you see a world in the shift where the football program could cause something akin to what happened with when Kevin Young came to basketball? High-level coach coming from the professional ranks who's got a very strong reputation and gets paid a lot of money and has an instant impact on BYU basketball by making them one of the most talked about programs in college basketball. There's really only one name out there that could do that, I think, in college football for BYU. Y'all know who I'm talking about. It's Andy Reid. Only other name beyond Andy Reid, because we all know that Andy's probably going to be a lifer in the NFL. He's going to retire with the Kansas City Chiefs. It looks like that, at least on its head. The only name that pops up in my brain to that level, maybe, and I say that it's tough to say that this would absolutely play off that way, but it's Kellen Moore. Like, Kellen Moore, a Boise State legend, but did join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's an active member of the faith. His wife, a lifelong member. Could he be that guy that makes that impact? That's really the only name that comes to mind for me right now. There's somebody out there that I'm unaware of. That very well could be the case, but those are the two names that kind of what you talk about there, what the impact it would have. It's Andy Reid or there's not a lot of names out there to do that. One other quick question, Laramie. How worried should BYU basketball be about Richie Saunders' injury? He seems to be the glue guy. Kevin Young was at media availability yesterday. He said that he expects Richie will be cleared in due time, but he said if there's any question about his ability his availability for tomorrow night against Florida A&M, they'll likely sit him out. I took that as code. We're not playing Richie Saunders against Florida A&M, but the hope is and the expectation is I believe that he'll be ready for Arizona State when Big 12 play opens up. All right. There you go. That's what I got for you guys on this show. It's been a little bit up and down, rambling a bit, but just different thoughts. I've been kind of just kicking around this old noggin of mine, but hope you guys weigh in with your thoughts. Comment, share with your family and friends, rate, review, do all the stuff to help this podcast grow, but more importantly, interact with us and let us know what you guys think. Am I up in the night in my evaluation of the transfer portal where it stands for BYU, or is it kind of there's two different trains of thought when it comes to the transfer portal? Are they both valid? There's a lot to be discussed. There's a lot to be discussed on the Diego Pavia situation. So as always, thank you for all the interaction, all the love, all the support. Once again, share this with your family and friends when you're at Christmas parties and the like of this holiday season. And yeah, thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars a part of your day. And thank you once again for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.